The Industrial Revolution started in Great Britain and transformed the world. It was the burst of major inventions and technical changes that took place in multiple industries, such as the switch from cottage industries to factories and the invention of the steam engine. As the textbook states, this growing national and regional economic specialization in the 19th century concentrated industrial power, leading to today's inequalities. The link between industrialization and revolutionary ideas is the inequality created by the Industrial Revolution that caused a domino effect that resulted in the emergence of revolutionary social, political, and economic policies. One result of this revolution was the migration of people from rural areas to cities in search of work. The high population in cities created a strain on society. In Britain, married women were still expected to contribute to the family's income, so they enlisted the help of their children. They would all work together as a unit at home or in a factory. However, as working conditions worsened, adults were reluctant to work in factories, especially cotton factories, which resembled sweatshops. Companies got child laborers, especially orphans, think Oliver Twist, to work as apprenticeships with the owners who had full control of the kids since they housed and fed them. The children were basically slaves. Child labor was eventually regulated through the implementation of the Factory Act of 1833, which banned workers under the age of 9 and placed restrictions on daily working hours of the other age groups. It also put in place workplace inspectors to enforce these rules. This broke up families who had been previously working together. Industrial factories tended to resemble English poorhouses, which were places where fully destitute people went to live at the public's expense. This resemblance increased public fear and hatred of factories and factory discipline. This anger led to new ideologies such as socialism, which advocated for the rights of workers. The poor working conditions with little pay helped create and enforce a divide between the rich elite factory owners and the working class poor. This economic inequality led to growing unrest and the formation of different labor unions and movements. These unions aimed to protect the interests of workers by dealing with the powerful employees. They wanted better wages and conditions, insurance against illness, accidents and disease, and old age. Political parties soon started catering to the workers to try and get votes. Political reforms and unionists against economic injustice were connected in a common struggle against the institutionalized privilege of the upper class. Across Europe, tensions came to a head in the form of the revolutions of 1848. Tensions increased due to cottage farmers resisting the exploitation by merchant capitalists, the pressure to adopt new farming techniques, the loss of access to collective land, exploited rural industries, and increased taxation. These conflicts turned to revolutions due to newly emerging ideologies such as liberalism, socialism, nationalism versus the traditional conservatism. Increasing pressure from the working class forced governments to become more democratic. Their revolutions were working.
The new and changing ways of life led to a need for new and changing ideas and political reforms. With the increase of industrialization, people were starting to ask for reforms by their government, many of which were influenced by ideas of liberty and equality, things that came out of the Enlightenment era. This new liberal ideology called for representational government with individual freedoms and equality under the law. The unwillingness to change the structures of the states and monarchies led to the reactionary ideology of conservatism, which was the belief of keeping traditional ideas in place and getting rid of any and all change. The conservative governments rejected liberal views and put legislations in place to suppress any liberal and radical movements. While some critics saw liberalism as being too radical, other critics saw it as not being radical enough. Representational government was just not cutting it for people anymore, and there was more and more calls for male suffrage. And while the women's suffrage movement wouldn't happen until a few more years later, women were already starting to feel their inequality under the law. Liberalism, which was popular amongst the middle class, started emphasizing ideas of class divisions, and the working class felt that liberal reforms were only benefiting a small number of class interests. Socialism was not only a response by critics of liberalism, but also as a direct response to the Industrial Revolution. Inequalities grew larger from the industrialization of the economy, and workers believed that the governments had the power to put legislations in place to protect them. France was influential to the social movement, as many citizens were upset with the outcome of the French Revolution. Some other major influencers in the socialism movement were Karl Marx and his pal Friedrich Engels. They included some of their works on topics such as socialism, communism, and capitalism. Marx argues that there would be two clear-cut classes, the wealthy bourgeoisie and the working proletariat, and that in order for the working class to be emancipated, they would have to unite and form a new proletariat dictatorship. This in itself led to a series of sub-ideologies such as Marxism and the revisionism movement, which was basically Marxist rhetoric updated to fit the modernizing times. Alternatively, this also led to an influential anarchist intellect, Mikhail Bakunin, who believed that unlike Marx, smaller groups of people were already ready for a revolution against the wealthy, and that there should be an abolition of all government structures, as there will always be inequality and oppression. Ultimately, socialism looked different from country to country and state to state. This textbook explains that it was very much a nationalized movement. This theme of nationalism is something that we'll be seeing a lot throughout the 19th and 20th centuries. Communities are starting to feel a strong sense of cultural unity and felt that that unity should be translated into one political state. Throughout this time, nationalism would be the basis for large amounts of uprisings and political movements throughout the continental Europe. It led to the unification of states, such as the German Confederation. However, nationalism had some pretty dangerous results as well, because it created a grander sense of us versus them and played off the idea of national supremacy. It may not have been one sole revolution to completely challenge the order of Europe, but a series of gradual changes and smaller revolts occurred. These new ideologies served not only as a response to the industrialized world, but as a way to challenge it and the new social problems and inequalities caused as a result.
The Industrial Revolution led to gender inequalities, which in turn resulted in movements that were revolutionary. A benefit for women in the Industrial Revolution involved them playing a greater role in society. In the beginning of the 20th century, governments began to provide the use of public schools, in which females were educated very differently than males. For instance, girls were taught embroidery, drawing, and music, while boys were being prepared for businesses and construction. The Victorian age describes a time period from 1837 to 1901, and during this period, they contained vastly differentiated roles for both men and women. Men and women were described to be in separate spheres, as they were expected to sustain differentiated roles. For instance, women were to play the roles of mothers, wives, along with homemakers, while men were to be specifically just breadwinners. Due to modern industries, once girls reached the age of 10, they were expected to still contribute to their household chores, but also to earn wages by working in places such as textile mills. Further, the main priority of women remained to raise their children. Therefore, they were mainly only to work before marriage. And in this time, they were offered less professional jobs, and they were also paid much less than men were. Some women, regardless of little or no pay, chose to work as they were not satisfied by their home lives, no matter how busy they were. The lack of satisfaction was due to the inequality and opportunity in society. As this thought developed and women desired professional equality, steps began to take place that would gradually grant women more equality. A revolutionary example would be suffragists. Millicent Fawcett, as the president of the National Union of Women's Suffrage Society, believed in gaining suffrage through a responsible and peaceful manner. Emmeline Pankhurst found Millicent's ways passive, however, and therefore she took a more aggressive approach in her Women's Social and Political Union. The right to vote in Britain was granted then in 1918 by the House of Commons due to the role that women played in the World War. Now, Susan Anthony and Elizabeth Stanton funded the National Women's Suffrage Association, which proved to be a success in 1914 as 12 states in the United States were granted suffrage. And as the increase of factories opened jobs for both males and females, some women maintained the view of working two demanding jobs when looking at both housework and pre-industrial chores, in addition to the new factory work caused by the Industrial Revolution. Therefore, many lower class married women lacked the appeal for brutal labor as a job and accepted the sexual division in the industrializing society. Moral disapproval also arose for women past puberty working in mines due to sexual aggression. This caused the Mines Act of 1842 to be set in place, which did not allow women to work in difficult jobs. However, this also reinforced gender division by keeping females in low-paid and lower-ranked jobs than men. All in all, the Industrial Revolution caused the expectations of women to rise, but it also caused limitations on their opportunities, which in turn led to occurrences such as suffrage. Women's rights were neglected as industry prompted further gender inequality in the workplace, and this pushed for women to not only desire equality, but to also act on it. The right to vote is revolutionary because it allowed women to voice opinions that would impact social change. Suffrage fulfilled women and proved their potential to vastly shift existing rules. Further, women continued to for equality through the years, following the legacy of women who fought for suffrage along with other female activists. While the Industrial Revolution ushered in our modern world and policies such as unions, suffrage, and socialism, it also enhanced some of today's problems, like the divide between workers and the rich and elite, gender inequalities, and stigma surrounding socialism.